Okay, everybody, let's get started with today's class. I appreciate you watching this as I can't be there in person today. So let's get into this next class. And we're going to be talking about the use of power and the proper use of it in when running a group or in influencing a bunch of people. And I gotta tell you that when I was first recording this, or when I first did this series of slides, I was working for an organization that I didn't really like. I liked the people that I immediately worked with, but I didn't like the higher ups um, in in management and in upper management. And the more I was preparing the material for this set of slides for using power, the more I realized how much the organization that I was working for was really abusing their power. And it was weird, when you have a sense of like, these people are not playing fair or they're not doing the best job that they can for the workers and hence for the individuals that we're supporting, and they're just abusing their position. Well, going through this material, I came to realize that that was very much the case with these people that I was working for. And I just got more and more resentful over the way they were treating us or people in general, not even me per se, but part of it was me, but just people in general, like how they were treating some of the frontline workers, some of the agency staff, and it was an absolute abuse of power. And I was I was really resentful over that. So we're going to talk about a few things over the course of today with relation to that, okay? So Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State for the U.S. In the 70s and 80s, a man who wielded immense power, um, and a man who knows a thing or two about influencing power. In some ways, the Secretary of State is more, or especially at the time, was more influential than the President of the United States. And so, when I look at um, and he, even in the media, was really well regarded as somebody who wielded immense power. And he wasn't a particularly attractive man. I mean, he wasn't unattractive. He was just a normal guy. But he he was seen with some very good-looking women and hobnobbed with a lot of very influential people because of his position and because of the power that he wielded. So if anybody knows about how power is the ultimate aphrodisiac, it was definitely Henry Kissinger. Uh, Let me just take a quick pause for a second. Okay, so when we talk about power, power is the social science, what energy is the physics. It's a thing that moves the thing that makes things happen, in other words. Okay. So when we talk about power, when we talk about influencing groups, when we talk about how to set up people so that we get the best out of them, how do you set up a group so that it functions at the best that it can? All of that comes down to your ability to influence people. And I hope that makes common sense to you that obviously, if somebody tells you to do something, whether you do it or not depends on two things. Number one, the influence that they have over you and how much that influence matters to you. If that person is your boss and they tell you what to do, and you accept the fact that they can have this power over you because they will reprimand you and or fire you, then it's more likely that you will spend time. doing the thing that they ask you to do. But if a person thinks they have a lot of power over you, but you think, um, like if you have the exact same scenario, you have a boss who tells you what to do, but you are leaving that job, and maybe your boss doesn't know it, or maybe your boss does know it, it doesn't matter. They still ask you to do something before you leave, and you're like, why do I have to? I'm leaving this job anyway. Nothing has changed in terms of who that boss is to you. What has changed is the way you perceive that boss. So now all of a sudden you have an unequal power dynamic, and you do not accept the fact that you have to listen to this person anymore. And so they have no power over you. So their ability to influence becomes negated. The same way that you could have somebody who doesn't have any power at all over you. You don't have to do what they say, but you could say, I want to help you out. I want to do something for you, or I want to assist in your job or your endeavor. I want to volunteer to raise funds for this church. And so as a result of that, you um, allow yourself to be influenced by this person that doesn't have any influence over you at all if you don't allow it. So in a very real sense, you are controlled because you allow yourself to be controlled. And that is the result of power. Now, I know some of you are going to argue, well, Raj, they're my boss. I have to do what they say. No, you don't. You can always go get another job. You may not want to, but you can always go get another job or think that you can and choose not to obey your boss or choose not to follow their instructions. There's lots of sorry, not lots, but I guess there are quite a few recorded examples of Nazi soldiers who refused to follow the orders and execute Jewish people and other races during World War II. And they just refused to follow orders. And some of them were punished for that and died, and some of them were punished for it and lived to tell about it. So even in the most dire situations, it is still kind of your choice. You don't want to face the consequences sometimes for that choice, but it is still your choice. And so the power to move people very much is centered on um, the ability to influence and your willingness to accept that influence. Okay. Where you start getting, these inequalities is because its distribution among groups determines a group's outcomes, their cohesiveness, their efficiency, and even their ability to continue operating as a group. If you have a huge power imbalance, at some point that structure will probably collapse. And you can have long examples like, totalitarian regimes and governments that maybe last years or even decades. Or you can have smaller dynamics of like companies where, they're hugely unfair to the people, and in a mass walkout, all of these people chose um, to go on strike at the same time, and the company ground to a halt. And there's lots of examples of this in history. And so it is the capacity to affect the outcome of oneself, others, and the environment that is, at the heart of power. So the dynamic interdependence view of power, and these are different theories around this, or how power affects social dynamics and group dynamics in particular. Right? The dynamic interdependence view of power is that the dynamics of power is constantly changing. Um, dynamic, if you can think about the root word of that, that means changing, right? So when you say somebody's dynamic, it means they're all constantly in a state of flux. They're constantly moving. They're constantly changing. They're entertaining because you never know what's coming next. You can say that's a dynamic personality. When you talk about, dynamics as a word, it means changing or movement or ethereal even. And so, if you look at power, where 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 does power come from? Is it um, due to a function or like of a position, such as like president? Is it a place, as in like, church? So there's a presence of God at church, and so you feel power at church. Is it a situation like a nurse in an emergency department? Is it a dynamic between two people? You know, I had an uncle that fell sick. He was American, and he came here for a wedding, stayed with at my father's house. And during the wedding that night, he wasn't feeling very good. The following morning, I get a call from my father that he was basically unresponsive, breathing, but unresponsive, and just in a bed, with his eyes open and not responding to anything. And we rushed him to the emergency department, and he was in ICU for about 10 days. And as you can imagine, all these people are here for in town for a wedding, and they all wanted to come and see him in the ICU. Well, the gatekeeper of who gets to go in and out, in the end, fell on the head nurse for the emergency department. And she started becoming irritated that all these people were milling about in the emergency room, and they're all trying to go get in at the same time to see my uncle. And it became and she let my father and I know very, very quickly on that she would not allow all of these people to come and disrupt other patients because of this one person. And she became the person of influence, the person of power in that dynamic. And we had to listen to her. And so between my father and I, we escorted people in ones and twos in order to see him, even though he was unconscious, truly. So, um, in that situation, who held the power? Well, in the end, this person, because of her situation, you could even make an argument that it was because of that place in the emergency department, because of her position as head nurse, that she was in a situation where she was the most powerful person in there. She was probably more powerful even than security, because security would only do what she asked for. So you could say that in that sense, power was a function of situation. In a very real sense, when you have an interaction between two people, one person always influences the other. Okay. Now, in a fair dynamic and relationship, that influence shifts back and forth pretty evenly between two people. But any given moment in time, one person is influencing the other. One person might be explaining something to another person, and that person either accepts it or rejects it. If that person accepts it, they've been influenced. If that person rejects it, then they have influenced the person who's telling. If you're telling a joke, like between those two people, if one person's telling a joke to the other, if that person finds it funny, they have been influenced. If they don't find it funny, they have not been influenced. So even in a tiny, moment, a fleeting moment in time, power shifts back and forth between two people. Your ability, and people who study sales talk about this a lot. Your ability to influence another person ultimately comes down to, the success of your life. When you are dating your partner, you are using your best sales technique to um, explain or get them to see that you are the best person to be with them in that moment. And, if your thoughts are turning to marriage, then, you're trying to convince them that you are the best person for them to marry. And if you're just wanting sex from them, well, then you're trying to convince them that you are a good person to spend a night with. But it is still a sales job in that moment. And when you have kids, right, whether you have kids or not, that's a sales job if one of you disagrees. When you have kids and you're trying to get them to eat, and you're trying to get them to eat their vegetables or something that they don't like, well, you're doing your best to do a sales job to get your kids to eat. However, which way you do that. When you're going for a job, you're trying to convince the interviewer that you are the best person to give a job offer to. It is a sales job. It is a condition of power and influence over the other person. You're trying to convince them you are better than all these other people who are going for the same position, that you are the best person. That is a sales job, and that is power, your ability to do so. And if you end up getting the job offer, that means that you were able to influence that person more than anybody else was, or they were convinced of your inherent ability to do the job more than anyone else was. That's power and influence, and that's how much it can change. So, if you look at power and the competitive context versus the cooperative context. Okay. The competitive context of power is that one success is gained at the expense of another's. We call that a zero sum or a fixed pi resource, meaning that in order for me to win, it implies that you have to lose. You know, so this view of power sees power as a limited quantity to be hoarded. And if I gain, that means you lose. If you think about just about any individualistic sport out there, even any team sport, if you look at like anything in the Olympics, for instance, when they're in the bobsled and they're going down the track, on the ice tube and that long toboggan kind of thing. And there's two or sometimes three or four even people in that thing. As they're going down, they take times of the toboggan as it goes through certain points, and they compare those times with other people that have run and said, "Oh, look, they're running, 200ths of a second faster, 200ths of a second slower, and here they go to this other phase, lower down the track, and now that gap has widened to, 4/100ths of a second, or it's increased by 4/100ths of a second, or whatever." And so you very much see that as one person gains, that means the other person is losing by that amount. So it's a fixed pi resource. And in order for me to get the gold, that implies that you have lost some time, some strength, some points, something that you're measuring in the sport in order for you to get to qualify for silver. Okay. So the general way in which we call that the zero sum. As one gains, the other diminishes in some kind of measure. So if you look at um, uh, power um, traditionally from countries or from rulers, right? When you had people who owned land, and hence, if they own the land, they own the workers that worked on that land in order for the workers to feed themselves, they had to work the land. So the landowners were the most powerful people once upon a time in European and North American society. Actually, not so much North American society because there was so much land available when the land was developing, but especially in European society, and I suspect in African society too, once upon a time. So in that context of people in positions of power, whether they were born into it or whether they worked and then acquired through ruthlessness means or through wars or whatever, when they were the most powerful people, they definitely believe that power is a commodity that should be hoarded. And it kind of makes sense. If my family owns, a significant owns anything. They own a building, they own a piece of land, they own a statue. It doesn't matter. If my family owns that thing, I am not going to want to give it up. I consider that mine. And it's been passed down from generation to generation. I don't willingly give that up just because. So I very much believe that's mine. My family worked for it. I own it. And so they believe that that commodity should be hoarded. And we call that the iron law of oligarchy. In other words, um, if I'm part of a strong structure, right? A strong family, a strong political party, a strong organization, like the mafia or something like that, right? Those are oligarchs. And they believe in the iron law of oligarchy, meaning if we own it, that is ours. We don't give up the control of that to anybody. And as you can imagine, because that it does act in a unidirectional way, all power flows up. If you look at uh, just about any organization is set up like a pyramid. You got a bunch of workers at the bottom, a bunch of supervisors, the next level, a bunch of managers, the next level, maybe a bunch of directors after that. And then you've got a couple of CEOs, and then you've got the president or the CEO, whichever at the very top. All power flows up. Okay. So, and when we spoke, I think it was the third week about how people, depending on where they are in a network, the person who gets the most information is seen as the leader. And then we talked about the ability um, to create change. If it's unidirectional, it can take longer. It's shorter to create change, but the change doesn't take as well. When you have bidirectional, I can speak to the CEO as much as the CEO speaks to me. They are much more likely to when they create change, when they ask for a change in the way something is done, they're much more likely to have it happen in a bidirectional kind of communication network. But it takes longer because there's that feedback that goes, between us. And so power is very much a consequence of all of that um, flow of information. And in terms of the competitive context, information only flows one way, right? Power only flows the other. So information goes from the top down, power flows from the bottom up, right? The person at the top holds the most power. And as you can imagine, if you think about a landowner that maybe owned slaves, or even if they didn't own slaves, it was people of their free will living on the land, building farms, farming, and what a certain percentage of their crops gets sent to, say, the king, right? Or the emperor or the ruler, or the land baron. Okay, was another popular term in Europe. Okay, so the land baron owned the land. Free people, chose to set up a farm on the baron's land, farmed it, and supplied the baron with the food that he needed for him and his family and friends by virtue of owning the land. Well, as you can imagine, whether you're a free person or not, that dynamic is inherently coercive because the baron can come at any time and say, I'm taking this land back. Now, it would not be popular for a baron to do so because pretty soon when people start thinking any of us could go at any time, they would all in mass revolt get up and leave or something, possibly. So in a well-functioning organization or in a well-functioning dynamic, people are generally speaking very fair to each other, but there's always that unspoken rule that you do what I tell you to do. And if you look at an organization that you work for right now, or maybe that you've worked for in the past, even if you got along with the people that you work with, even if you got along with the CEO and you like their mission and everything else, the possibility that you would be fired is very, very low. Right? If they like your work and you like them and you like working and all, the possibility of getting fired is pretty low. But there is still that unspoken dynamic there that says, I can fire you at any time. When I was working for a psychology firm, I played an April Fool's prank on one of my bosses. There were two psychologists that started the firm. I played an April Fool's prank on one of them. I left a note on his windshield saying that I'd hit his car, or that like a person hit the car, and then they left a note saying, "I'm really sorry. Call me and I'll pay for the damages." Well, of course, his car wasn't hit, but I was standing off from afar watching this, and he goes around his car looking for where the car has been hit, and he can't see it, and he's scratching his head and he's looking around, and he goes again to see if he missed it. He can't see anything. And so he finally eventually gets in his car, he drives off, and then I get in my car, I drive off, and I pull up alongside of him, and I'm laughing, and I roll down my window, and I said, "That was me who sent the note." Well, the first thing out of his mouth is, "Oh, you think that's funny? You're fired." And he liked me. And I always thought it was funny. Now, in the end, he was joking, of course. But I always thought that was interesting that his first go-to response when he'd been tricked was, "You're fired." As if he could just fire me for no reason. In Ontario, that's called wrongful dismissal. And I would have taken him to court. Like, I'm going extreme here, but I'm just saying so you guys understand that there are employment laws in Ontario and in every province um, about what an employer is able and not able to do when you're in their employ. And they can't just fire you just like, well, sorry. In truth, they can. They can fire you at any time for anything. They don't even need a reason, right? But if um, if they f- if they fire you for a reason that is against the Employment Standards Act, you could sue them. You can get an employment lawyer and you can sue them for wrongful dismissal and all the damages that are part of that. Okay. So I always thought, oh, there it is, that inherently coercive nature in our relationship that even though he liked me and I liked him, and we got along, I mean, obviously we got along great because I felt like I could prank him. But in all of that, there was still that unspoken rule, I could fire you. And the first time that I did something that he didn't like, the first thing out of his mouth was, "You're fired." Ha ha ha. So people who have their power threatened will resist their freedoms being taken away, and this is called reactance. That's probably a good thing to ask on a test, I think. I can't remember what I created for the test, but I'm just saying that sounds like a good definition that I would put on there, right? Somebody taking away somebody's freedom is called reactance. So Uh, if you contrast that with the cooperative view of power, if you look at the cooperative view of power in terms of like a team climbing a mountain, right? You have a team of four mountain climbers, and no one climber can climb the mountain by themselves. So you take turns leading and not and hammering spikes into the rock and anchoring, and then climbing up and sliding the rope down so that others can climb up the rope. And you do that for a bit, the next person takes over because that's the harder task. right? And so you expend your energy a lot sooner. So there is this, there is this, um, the need to achieve a goal together because individually they cannot. When you have that cooperative view of power, you believe, or the dynamic dictates that that power is expandable, meaning that I can encourage you to achieve even more, um, if I support you in the proper way. If you have one climber who's an exceptionally good climber, I might do a lot of the other stuff to support them while they while they find handholds and lead the climb. And in truth, that's actually how, mountain climbers climb. There is a lead climber, and the lead climber is someone that usually is exceptionally good at, um, climbing, uh, or finding handholds where it looks like there aren't any. So that power can be expandable because I will support that person and give them the time and give them the materials in order to climb because, as they succeed, I succeed. Which by its very nature, by its very nature, it implies that that power is shareable. It implies that the very way in which that, um, power is distributed means that sometimes I lead, sometimes you lead, sometimes I call the shots, sometimes you call the shots. Of course, that means it's bidirectional, and it of course implies that is non-coercive. I mean, here's another example. If you look at, a sales team that works for like Honda or Ford or whatever, right? And they might have they might work out of the same office in a certain part of the city. So, for instance, you have Honda downtown, you have Honda Woodbridge, you have Honda, Willowdale, you have Honda Aurora, you have Honda Scarborough, right? Now, Honda Canada, from the head office, they might run a promotion saying whichever office sells the most cars in this next at the by the end of this month, they will each get $1,000 bonus from Honda Canada for being the number one sales, team. Now, understand this, every single person, let's say there's 10 people on that sales team, every single one of those 10 people wants to be the number one salesperson. They all want to be. It means more commission, obviously. It means greater recognition too. So they all want to be the number one, but they also, um, they also recognize that they cannot win the competition alone because there's no one salesman that is good enough to outsell 10 salespeople from another location, right? So the salesman recognizes I need to support my team. And even though all of us are compete against each other as a team, we um, we need to beat out the other offices in selling cars to get the $1,000 bonus. And by the way, that's real. That's actually a thing that happens. So by its nature, that view of their working dynamic is very non-coercive. It's very cooperative, right? Um, it might be, and here's the contradiction to it, that it might be asymmetrical in the sense that in real life, power is always, in one set of conditions at any one time. As I told you, even when you have two people who are pretty much equal in status and power, and they're having a conversation with each other, their ability to, uh, um, influence each other shifts back and forth repeatedly. So sometimes I'm influencing you, sometimes you're influencing me. And so overall, we have a very equal, shareable, bi-directional influence of power. But at any given moment in time, I'm either influencing you or you're influencing me. Again, like I said, either I'm making you laugh or you're making me laugh, or I'm making you laugh, trying to make you laugh, and you are not finding it funny. Or I'm trying to convince you of an idea and you either accept that idea or you don't. And so, what creates this competitive context of power versus a cooperative context of power? A lot of times it comes down to ability, ability to influence, and having the right information. If you are a landowner, you have all the power because you have access not to information per se, but to the land. And you have the competence to hire good farmers to farm the land because the more successful they are as farmers, the more food they make, which means the more abundance for you and for the people who rely on you in general. If you look at the modern age, if you look at somebody like Mark Zuckerberg, who created Facebook, or Steve Jobs with Apple, or Bill Gates with Microsoft, or like any of these people, they have access to information. I mean, they're obviously very smart men. They have access to information the rest of us don't, and they set up these companies. And by the very way in which they set up these companies, they set up a inherent power dynamic that you need them for the platform. All these people making huge money on like YouTube. Well, YouTube is owned by Google. And YouTube wasn't started by Google. YouTube bought the guys who started YouTube. And as soon as Google bought YouTube, Google adjusted their algorithm so that people who post stuff on YouTube get ranked higher on the search pages than from any other in any other platform. That was a inherent power dynamic shift because they had access to the platform. They had access to information that you don't. Now they want your content because it makes them more prevalent in the end. But make no mistake about it, they have access, they have access to the information. Everybody that sells some product on Amazon, right? They they are successful because they have the platform of Amazon that people buy things off of. That's why they're successful. They could not set up, like an Etsy account or some other independent account and try to sell their things with the same level of success. The internet is vast. It's almost limitless. For all intents and purposes, it is limitless. Nobody would find you in all of that space. It's like why do companies or stores set up in a mall? Because the mall is a place that attracts people. And when people are attracted to the space, then they see your stuff and then they're willing to buy. So if you have like a sport check in a mall versus a sport check that is a standalone store, unless that store becomes really well established, almost for sure, a sport check in a mall is going to sell more than a standalone sport check. That is the power of influencing people to come to one spot, in this case, the mall. And it's the same thing with all these platforms, whether it's Google or Amazon or what have you, or even Etsy, right? They have access to the information and they want you as much as you want them, but not quite as much because you kind of want them more. Amazon does not need any one seller, any 100 sellers. Amazon's network is vast. but they still want people to go to their platform versus anybody else in order to start selling stuff. They don't want them going to say Alibaba to sell stuff. That's the difference, right? So there it's cooperative, but there's still kind of this asymmetrical um, feeling of power there in that dynamic. So if you think about some historical examples, Pope Urban II started the Crusades, and those Crusades lasted long after he died. Okay, it lasted 200 years, and he had warriors who went out to all parts of the then conquered lands of Rome to convert people to Christianity. And they imposed their will on people who had their own pagan gods. And, for those people, their God was not any less or any more than anybody else's God. And all of a sudden, here comes all these soldiers, and they will conquer and rape and pillage, which is interesting considering they're doing it in the name of God. But they would do all of these things in order to get people to convert from their wild paganistic gods to a much more moral, upright, and proper religion called Christianity. But the question is, how did Pope Urban accomplish the goal of having people um, continue this crusade for 200 years, long after his death? I mean, like, that's power. When you can have somebody's vision for something last hundreds of years after your death. Why did they do it? Well, this is the question. Was it because of reward of power? And by reward of power, there's the immediate, such as, you acquire wealth, you acquire land and or castles on behalf of the church for being a good warrior. There's that reward of power. There's the belief that um, they will be rewarded in heaven for doing God's work. And think about those people who stand on street corners right now. There's some in my neighborhood. And not just on Sundays, but during the week on a Friday night, there are people that stand there with their megaphone and their amplifier speaker, and they're talking about whatever they're talking about that's religious. And why are they doing that? Well, I think part of why they're doing that is because they believe they'll be treated more favorably when they face their maker. So there's that reward of power belief there. And it can be very strong when you're talking about religion, right? There's the coercive nature of power in the sense that if you don't do what I say, we are going to strip all lands and titles from you. We'll throw you into jail. Um, and I will not, here's the Pope saying, I will not intervene on your behalf when you stand before the Creator to put in a good word for you, right, with God. So there is a coercive nature to power in the Crusades. Then there's legitimate power because I think most people honestly believed that the Pope has the ear of God. I think most people see the Pope not just as a man, but as something a little bit higher than the average person, a little higher than the average man. I think most people, well, no, I don't know about most people. I think a lot of people see the Pope as a, a higher form of being because of their communion with God. Instead of just seeing the Pope as just a man, with all the foibles and tribulations and doubts and weaknesses of any other man, just thrust into this position of power. But in the end, they are they really any better than you or I? Are they really any holier than you or I? Are they any more likely to get into heaven than you and I? Well, there's a lot of people who believe that he is. And so again, they choose to believe in the inherent power of a pope. And what the pope said must come from the right hand of God. God wants to do this, and we feel righteous in our path to go and influence others to join the way. So there's a legitimate power there. There's what we call the referred power. And you see this with a lot of kids nowadays, or actually just in general. A lot of people with celebrities, right? A lot of people follow celebrities on like Instagram or Twitter or whatever the hell else they follow. I couldn't care less personally, but um, they want to know what's going on in this celebrity's life, right? They want to be in the know. They want to know the stuff. They want to be like them. And so by sharing some stories that come from, Jennifer Lopez just shared that she had grapefruit for breakfast. Well, Jennifer Lopez talked to me. She told me that she had grapefruit for breakfast. And so now I feel special because Jennifer Lopez tweeted out to me. Like there are people that are actually that dumb and they need to feel that special, or they feel special following an example of what we call referred power. So in other words, the desire to be like J Lo or to be like The Rock or to be like whomever, right? And celebrities exploit that, kings exploit that, politicians exploit that. Um, Anybody in position of power that thinks that they have power over or others who revere them in some kind of way, they hold that power over them. They know it. Whether they choose to exploit that or not, well, that becomes a different story, right? You can have moral leaders with high power, and you can have immoral leaders with high power. You can also have immoral people with low power and um, moral people with low power. You can have all these dynamics. What it comes down, even though um, I think it's Mao Zedong, the Chinese philosopher, who said, "Absolute power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." So Mao Zedong's life and experience led him to surmise that you cannot have somebody with power who will not exploit that at some point for their own ends. You could have expert power, meaning that in the case of the Pope, that they've got um, their only way to God is through him. And isn't that what Jesus said in the end? Jesus said, I am the way and the light and the life. And whoever goes to God comes through me is guaranteed a place in heaven. So there's that expert power of saying, he is God's representative here on earth. I want to be like him, blah, 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 blah. And then there's the belief, again, that we've given to them, and this is part of legitimate power, is informational power, saying that he knows the will of God. God wants us to go and convert these godless and lawless nations upon which Rome has conquered, and even that Rome hasn't conquered. in his good name. So the informational power to know that um, we know the will of God, or he knows the will of God, and we will know the will of God through his intermediary, which is Pope Urban II. And all of this is underlined by the perception. It is the perception of that power by others that makes them powerful. See, in the end, that Pope is only powerful because people choose to make him so. And someone like me comes along and I see him just as a man, an important man, but a man nonetheless. And if he said, well, my word is according to God, my will is to go out and convert people to Christianity. And if they don't want to convert, you convince them. And if you still don't want to be convinced, then you will kill them until they start believing. Um, and eventually they will um, start to believe in me. Do you understand? I I don't believe the Pope when he says that is God's will, because I consider the Pope to be just a man. And I think he's got his own agenda and whatever. I choose not to give him the power that other people give. So if he says, you need to go out and kill in the name of God, I'm like, no God that I worship wants me to kill somebody. And I'm not going to follow your orders. Well, at that moment, that's when the Pope understands I do not have power over them, over him, because he does not choose to revere me. Right? So when we talk about that, the bi-directional in the couple of slides ago, that bi-directional thing of power, flow of information for power. Well, I influence you, you influence me, as long as I agree with it. And when I don't, you do not have power over me anymore. Aristotle noted another example. Aristotle noted that people think it's right that they should be revered by those inferior to them. So they believe that those of low power should not treat them harshly at all and are insulted by those that should know their place and create trouble out of ignorance and spite. And there, up to today, there is very much this belief. And it was Aristotle who first noted it, that if I am important because I am rich, for instance, then you should do what I tell you to do. And you should revere me because who are you? You're an immigrant that came to this country that owns nothing, and uh, I know better, so you should revere me. That is the thinking of a certain category of people, and it is prevalent to this day. I remember working at a place called the Board of Trade, and in the Board of Trade, it was a members only kind of place, and this one boardroom, this member went in with what we were pretty sure was a high-priced call girl, like a high-priced prostitute. And he took her there for dinner, and then he was in this boardroom, and it was very irregular and unusual for somebody to just go into a boardroom without booking it. And we had these little peepholes on the door so we could tell when meetings were over and we could go and set up and all these other things and be responsive to the clientele. So we would look in the peephole and they weren't doing anything. They were just sitting there talking. But we were like, this is highly irregular. Nobody wanted to do anything about it because he was a member and we were just like workers. This is when I was in university. And we didn't want to upset this person of power. right? And I was irreverent even back then. And I knocked on the door and came in, and I said, let's call it Mr. Hill. I said, Mr. Hill, you didn't book the boardroom. What are you doing here? I goes, well, I just want to be here. I want to have a private conversation with my companion. And I said something like, why do you think you can do that without booking it? And he says, because I'm rich and I'm powerful. He literally said that. He says, because I'm rich and I'm powerful. And me being, in school, knowing this is not going to be my job or anything like that, or not even that, because I did like the job. It paid very, very well. I did like the job. I did need the job, but there was still, I guess, that irreverent streak in me. And almost without thinking, I turned back to him and I said, well, you might be rich, but I don't know how powerful you are. And his companion, the woman, she giggled a little bit. And I closed the door and I just left them alone. And I thought about it afterwards. I said, wow, that was really ballsy of me to say that to somebody who is a member of the club, of the Board of Trade. Like for me to speak like that, who am I? I'm just a worker. I'm nobody, really. For me to go and say that to somebody was very improper. And to be honest, if he had said something, I might have been fired. I probably would have been reprimanded in some kind of, but apparently he never did. But I draw your attention to what he said though, which I thought was interesting. He said, I'm rich and I'm powerful. And I'm like, wow, that is somebody who thinks really highly of themselves and who honestly believes in Aristotle's philosophy, that people inferior to them feel like they should be revered. And so when you have people in low position or low power like me, um, and they treat them harshly. The people in positions of power feel insulted, as in like, how dare they? You should know your place, Raj. You should know you don't speak to a person that way. And it was kind of not bred. It was kind of explained to us that we should treat the members of the club this way. They're very exclusive and hoity-toity, and they spend a lot of money actually to belong to this club. They should be treated a certain kind of way. It was kind of imparted to us, this thing. So, um, and if you looked at my behavior, Mr. Hill would have looked upon that as I was creating trouble because I was ignorant or because I was spiteful, because I was envious of his position or something. And, maybe that's true, maybe that's not. Maybe sometimes that is true, maybe sometimes it's not. But a person in a position of power interprets people that way to say, you want what I have, and you should do what I say instead. So, what are things that high power individuals use to justify the status quo? This makes a great test question, by the way. Just saying. Um, some things that they do is legitimize their own privileges and intimidate low power individuals. You see this all the time in companies where there is like a CEO or a director or executive director or something like that. When you have these people who, by virtue of their position, make things difficult for people lower down. And when, as I told you, I was working for an organization at the time that I was gathering material to create this PowerPoint, and I was reflecting on some of the people that I worked with. in that organization, especially one of the directors. And that director made sure that the people under her, and I actually knew her personally. I actually went to grade school with her. Like that's how far back I went with her, grade school and high school with her. I knew her quite well. And she made sure that the people under her knew that she was the boss. And she would ask for stuff and would forget stuff and then blame other people. And she would penalize people who dared to talk back to her or to question her. Like there was all kinds of stuff that she did, or that she tried to get away with. And to be honest with you, even thinking about it now, it makes me angry, to be honest with you, that she was able to act that way by virtue of her position. And that's all it was. She definitely wasn't smarter than I was part of the clinical department. Forget the clinical department. All of the clinical department was smarter than she was, but she wasn't even the smartest of the directors. And there was like four or five directors. She wasn't even the smartest or most educated of the directors. But she had one particular position or one particular portfolio that she was responsible for that was an important one. And she believed in the inherent legitimacy of her position over anybody else. And all the people that I wasn't part of her department because I was clinical, but I worked with all the people of her department, and all of them, almost without exception, kind of walked in fear of her a little bit in terms of fear, not of her, but of, you know, them being called up and having their job threatened if she was unhappy with them. And I gotta hand it to her. She she did a very good job of training people to fear her. A very good job. So people in high power positions legitimize their own privileges and intimidate low power individuals. They have this thing about self-enhancement. They make themselves feel or appear more important than what they are. In the end, in the example that I'm talking about with that director, in that person, the director, she got that position just because she was there for a long time. I know that because I know the organization and I know how they hired. It wasn't because she was more knowledgeable than anybody else. All of the directors were people who'd started when they were young and just put in the time and then applied for a position that possibly few other people applied for and few other people knew the ins and outs of the organizations long enough for, and they got hired for it, not because of any inherent competence, not because any of them went and learned anything extra about like leadership or management or power or any of the group dynamic stuff I've taught you guys already. They don't know any of that stuff. All of you right now are more qualified to lead a group or to lead an organization once you learn the organization, that is, than any of the directors that I've ever worked with. Sorry, not any of the directors I've ever worked with, but this group of directors that I'm talking about. All of you are more capable from a leadership standpoint to lead an organization or to lead a portion of the organization than these directors were. But they had this own sense of self-enhancement of who they were that made them feel important. Stuff like that just drives me freaking crazy. Um, they attribute low power, the people of low power, they attribute their success to them allowing it, right? You worked your way up because I wanted you to be promoted, because I put in a good word for you, because um, I gave you assignments to show off your skill so that you would appear competent, right? Because I allowed it. And so what we call the locus of control, it's still they still believe it resides with them, not with any individual person's ability to achieve on their own, to study and improve themselves and to do whatever it takes in order to achieve like um, not a raise, promotion in the company, right? Most people, when they get a promotion, it's because they've studied and they've practiced and they've learned the things that they needed to learn in order to do the job properly. But when you have power mad type individuals, they will say, no, it had nothing, them getting promoted had nothing to do with, how well they prepared. It had everything to do with the fact that I gave them assignments to show off their skills so that they would appear favorable to the hiring committee or whatever. That's their ego talking. That's how inherently biased sometimes their perception of control can be. And lastly, people in high power positions devalue low power individuals and their contributions to a project. They actually make them feel, because it's a power tactic, you understand? They make them feel less important. They make them feel like they can't, um, like their contributions are not valued. It's like, oh, you learned how to put together this PowerPoint for this presentation. Well, that's great, but really the buyers wanted us because of me, not because of the PowerPoint. And they devalue somebody else's contribution, which then makes them look more powerful, right? Which makes them look important. Sometimes you wonder, why do you think you get the right to even make that call over whose contribution led the buyer to wanting us and not somebody else? Why do you think you know? So I want you to think about this. That when you start seeing this, in maybe you're going to see this now because I've brought it to your attention. When you start seeing this with the people that you work with, especially your higher ups, when you start seeing this, you should read all of this, all of that behavior as them probably holding on to power that they don't truly believe they deserve. And in order to hold on to that power that they don't truly believe they deserve, they need to legitimize their position all the time. And so they come across really meanly. They come across very controllingly. They belittle, they undermine, they get sarcastic, they try to bully and control. And when you see that kind of behavior, you should learn, you should come to understand. You should come to understand that person does not truly believe they've earned that the power that they control. And they're afraid of losing it. Because really, uh what is anger? What is cruelty? What is barbarity? These are all outward manifestations of inner fear. And so when you see bullying, you should read that as that person has inner fear over their own self. So, um, the effects of power, when we talk about, um, as you can imagine, power and the dynamics of it, there have been a lot of studies in social science, in group dynamics, to test and study power. Okay. And so this one famous experiment, I think it was done in the 50s or the 60s from out of Stanford. And it became a famous example of a failed experiment, um, that demonstrated really quickly part about the ugly nature of human nature and about the corruption of power. Okay, the Stanford prison study, was supposed to be an experiment that was run with students in Stanford who, were arbitrarily assigned the role of either prisoner, or guard. Okay. And then within the guards, there were like supervisors and all this other stuff. But everybody there was a student at Stanford University. Everybody knew that they were randomly being assigned as either a prisoner or a guard. Okay. And they were going to and they ran this in, an abandoned wing of a local detention center. Okay. So it looked like a legitimate jail. And, they kind of the researchers tried to set it up like a real jail, and the students fell into these roles very naturally. And they thought, well, let's run this for 2 weeks and see what happens in if there are any changes in people's behaviors. The study in the end lasted 6 days because the behavior of the students got so out of control that they started fearing for the students' safety both ways. Okay. It became so, believable and so much like, um, a real prison, with the students who are being portrayed as prison guards, um, treating the students who are portrayed as prisoners, so poorly and so harshly that they started fearing for the prisoners' safety. And the prisoners, because they were starting to be mistreated and maltreated by the students who are acting as prison guards, the researchers started fearing that the prisoners were actually going to revolt and harm the students who were acting as prison guards. That's how real it got really quickly. So, what they found was that the supervisors expended less effort than their subordinates, but enjoyed more of the rewards because, when they got their will carried out by their underlings. Okay. And so they would say stuff like, go and, put prisoner, 52 in solitary confinement for 1 hour. So instead of being in a cell with like two other people or three other people, you isolate them, which apparently is like a really, punishing thing to do. And so they would go and do that for 1 or 2 or 3 hours at a time. And as their underlings did their will, so the supervisors started to enjoy that sense of power and then started saying, okay, well, go and, administer electric shocks to prisoner number 38. And they wouldn't give them or they would give them like really mild electric shocks. But a light would go on, they push a button, a light would go on, electric would go off, and there'd be a mild, electrical stimulation on the person. But, the person came to perceive that as I'm being punished, even though it wasn't really painful, but they felt it a little bit. And the supervisor would say, no, give them 10 more. They need to be taught a lesson. And then, hey, why didn't you make your bed properly? You're supposed to make your bed every morning. Give them, withhold breakfast from them or withhold dessert from them. And it was that sort of thing. And they started the prisoners started feeling the effects of a power hungry boss. And the underlings that the supervisors were in control of, they started seeing themselves as really unimportant. And they started paying less attention to them. And the oppressive behavior started to increase. And those relationships started to break down so much. And the prison guards and the supervisors became so oppressive that they had to suspend the experiment for fear of people's safety. And this was an experiment. And after 6 days, they abandoned and they wrote this huge paper and it was widely cited, and I think it's still cited in the literature to this day as an example of what happens in power hungry situations. So, that quote that I told you about that Chinese philosopher Mao Zedong, at least I think it's attributed to Mao Zedong, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think it's true. I can say that I felt it myself at times. I felt it myself. When I was working in a group home, I uh, I was very good with some of the hardest to serve clients. I had very good rapport with them. I had very good de-escalation skills with them. I was one of the premier staff for sure. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying that because that's just the way it was. Okay. And I had such good rapport with certain individuals that when they became escalated, right, and possibly, violent, aggressive towards staff or aggressive towards themselves, sometimes the staff's go-to response was just call Raj. And somebody would come get me from wherever if I wasn't in the area, right? Um, and they would come get me and say, Raj, so and so is going off or is starting to get aggressive. Can you come and de-escalate him? And it was very ego boosting for them to come and call me. It made me feel good, made me feel important, it made me feel strong to know that I was like a go-to person. And I would walk into a room. I'm not saying this to brag. It's not a bragging thing at all. But I would walk into a room and where the individual was, and there would be like four other staff around him or her, most of the time him. And that person, the individual is on the verge of going full blown aggressive. And just because it was me and just because of the strength of my rapport, sometimes I would walk into the room and I would just do this and they would start to calm down. Do you know how it looks like I had a magic power? You understand? The person would respond that well to me. Do you know how incredibly ego boosting it is for that to happen? And after a while, I started to believe kind of my own sense of importance, right? Why did I feel important? Is because people granted me that. People said, "Wow, you're so good with them, Raj. Um, um, We need you, kind of thing. And so that power was granted to me. Well, after a while, I came to realize that nobody else is learning how to work with this person well. Nobody else is taking the time. And I'm the one who's always being put at risk because sometimes I wasn't able to de escalate, and sometimes it ended up in restraint, and I was at the lead of the restraint. And I thought to myself, why am I continually putting myself at risk just because I am who I am and I'm good at my job? Why is nobody else taking time to become good at their job? Why is nobody taking time to build rapport with this person so that they have the skills and techniques that I do? And after I kind of came to that realization, I started to get resentful. And the more I got resentful, the less I did. And then all of a sudden, I would fall out of favor to a certain extent because people realized that Raj wasn't going to come just because they called him. And I would say, tell them to figure it out. I'm busy right now. I'm busy with another client, kind of thing. So in in kind of insidious ways, that power dynamic actually can start to take over if you let it. And it can start to become oppressive and or corruptive if you let it. So, what can someone with low power do? If you're a person in a position of low power, what can you do? Well, number one, clarify goals and increase the positive independence that person has. In other words, when you are faced with a boss who is very controlling, identify what goals the bosses have for the organization or for their department or for you. What are those goals? Because by the very nature of the work, you know that the boss cannot achieve those goals without you. Because if they could, they would. You are part of a network of people that they um, um, supervise, and they need you to do the work. They need you to support the individual. They need you to take the hits when that person becomes aggressive. They need you to prepare menu plans and take them out and do hygiene and all that stuff because they're not going to do it. So clarify what the goals are that the person has for the organization, and then clarify that there is an interdependence there. They need you and you need them kind of scenario. So by clarifying what the goals are and that the goals um, can only be achieved with people working together, that's the first thing you could do when you're in a low power situation, right? So you're trying to shift that power dynamic back. Clarify and develop low power members' resources so that they can function independently of others. Look, right now you have the United States threatening, in some kind of way, I guess, to take over control of Canada, right? Trump wants to make Canada the 51st state. And so they're about to put tariffs on Canada and all this other stuff as part of the ability for the states to take back some of their own revenue. Okay, as an intermediate step in this strategy. Okay, well, one of the best things Canada can do, and I've said this for years, one of the best things Canada can do is stop being so reliant on the United States to sell stuff to. America is Canada's biggest trading partner by far. We sell 55% of the things that we export to the United States. And because of that, because we depend upon them for 55% of our revenue as a country, that sets up an inherent power dynamic that is not good. We should diversify and start selling and exporting to other countries so that if any one person threatens to slap tariffs on us, it it will have an impact, but it won't have a major impact because we'll just say, well, we have other people to trade with. So when we talk about developing a low powers resources in the state, as far as a country like Canada is concerned, it is develop your resources of selling to other people. That's what they should do so that they can function independently of the states or of the states' attempted stranglehold on us. Identify the goals that are important to high power individuals and that can't be accomplished without them, which is kind of, part two or saying the same thing as the first point in terms of positive independence. What is positive independence? It is the notion that the goals cannot be accomplished without us helping you and you helping us. That's positive independence. So when you identify the goals that are important to your boss, and then saying, um, give me the resources so that I can help you accomplish this goal, right? And I will actually speak that way to people in a position of power. I'm putting things in perspective of what I can do for them. By the way, it's a hint for what you should do when you're going for a job interview. All of your answers should be how I can help your organization. It's not about what you can do for me. Why do you want the job? I want the job so I can make more money. No, that's not the right answer. I want the job because so I can feed my family. No, that's not the right answer. That might be the truth, but that's not the right answer. Why do you want the job? I want to be able to make a difference with the people that I work with and improve outcomes for their independence. That's the answer. I read a company before I go for an interview. I read their mission, vision, and values. And I will answer questions within the context of their mission, vision, and values because they've stated as an organization that these are the things that we value. We value cultural diversity. We value independence. We value people who take an interest in improving other people's lives. We value stakeholders' independence. We value if somebody's invested in our company, we value giving shareholders um, good value or a good return on their investment, right? If you if you know that about you're going to go work at a bank, for instance, and you're interviewing for a position, answer the question, why do you want to work there? In terms of, I believe in increasing profits so that we can help deliver good returns for your shareholders. Do you understand? They're going to recognize right away, wow, this person read our mission, vision, and values. And you get extra barks. Boom, 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 ding, 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 ding. You just won the job interview because you answered in terms of mission, vision, values, because you even took the time to read them. You even took the time to memorize them. That's the importance of what you do with this. And finally, negotiate a new contract with a high power member. If you can go above somebody who's giving you a hard time, like if you can go above the director's head if they're giving you a hard time, and go to the executive director and renegotiate a contract with them, that is a way to get around people who are trying to put you in a box or trying to stifle your power dynamic. Okay, that's how you would do it if the opportunity presents itself, right? Um, and a lot of times you may not have that ability to do so, but if you can, that's how you would do it. Other things you could do, educate them on their worth. I think I meant to say educate them on your worth more specific, more precisely, right? Some of you guys, I think all of you guys were with me when I talked about classroom dynamics last semester. One of the things I said over and over again is by the time you're done the course, you will know more than the teacher will about how to teach students with a disability. And the value of that is that sorry, not the value of that, you should let them know your value by displaying the thing that you know so that they know your worth. You might just be an agency staff, quote unquote, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't be treated with respect. And part of the way of being treated with respect is letting people know what you know, that what your skill set is, what are the things that you know how to work with an individual. So educating them on your worth increases your power and influence. Of course it does. And finally, bring them to the negotiating table using legal means if nothing else, um, if nothing else works, so that you increase the cost of them staying with the status quo, right? When they understand they can't just bully you because you're going to go to your union, they will start to back off. And if your union doesn't help you, then you get an employment lawyer. And when you threaten with legal action, I know a person who got um, renegotiated successfully their contract because they threatened to bring in a lawyer. And the manager of HR said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! I don't think we're at the lawyer stage yet." And this person said, "No, I think we are." Because if you're saying you want to increase my job duties, but you're not going to give me an increase in pay or an increase in or a higher title, like a higher job classification, because I'm doing more work. Well, that is you've essentially terminated my employment contract, and we we're going to have a problem, and so I'm going to get a lawyer. Well, long story short, she successfully renegotiated a contract and got a higher job classification as a result. So just the threat of legal action sometimes can make a difference. We have a saying that, and you've seen it for yourself, that when you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket, as one crab starts to climb out, and I've seen this, like it was freaky to me. One crab lower down will reach up, grab that crab, and pull it back down. So when a crab starts to make a break for freedom, tries to improve itself, others will pull that person back down. So low power groups may resent other low power groups or other low power members that start to get ahead. So when discrepancies between high and low power groups occur, the low power individual may feel resentful but won't engage in revenge because they fear the counter revenge. Um, and and the way to counter this is in the presence of a morally high third party. So what I mean by that is when you have people of discrepancies in high and low power, okay, people lower power down won't tend to try and get the like frontline workers will be reluctant to get a supervisor in trouble with their manager because they fear that the supervisor, when they find out, they're going to get revenge on the frontline worker, right? And so it might take a lot before somebody will go and try to undermine their supervisor when they believe their supervisor is doing wrong, right? Um, it'll take a while before they seek to go above their head because as soon as they do so, they know this person will 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 try to take it out on me. Well, they will if they believe that the supervisor's manager, right? So their boss, the supervisor's boss, is a morally upright and very fair individual. And maybe they even have a friendship or something like that. You see it all the time. People get away with certain things just because they're friends with the manager or the supervisor or whatever. And so, but even if they're not friends, if you believe that the person who's above your boss is a morally high character, you will take the steps to undermine their credibility, thinking that this person will treat me fairly. So, conflict may increase when trust is gone. No kidding, right? When you suspect bribery is there, when you suspect coercion is present, right? Conflict may increase as a result of this when you think that there is something shady going on. When you consider the G20 summit that happened in Ontario about 7 years ago or so, okay, leaders from the G20 countries came to Ontario, and it was actually held in Huntsville. But it started in downtown Toronto, and then they went up. Well, all of a sudden, these people came by the bus loads from other, like, I don't even know from where, into Toronto to riot, to picket the G20. And people broke storefronts, people turned over police cars, people climbed up light poles. They did all kinds of stuff. They were acting like hooligans. And rioting took place. And when the police started rounding them up, they actually put them in these big, like basically like a big cage. They caged them. And then to keep them in control, they hosed them down with water. Now, in the end, they violated their civil rights and everything else. But the police told them, if you come here to riot, riot peacefully. If you don't riot peacefully, we are going to arrest you. We are going to detain you. And most of the people that were arrested were not even from Ontario. But there are these people who are gathered by organizations that have an agenda and want to disrupt the G20 regardless, or the G7 or the G10, whatever, right? Whenever democratic countries come together to try and solve problems, there are organizations that work to undermine that. And that's where part of this happened. That's where part of this came from. So there was bribery. They were paid. They were like professional rioters that came to disrupt the proceedings of the G20. So in that sense, conflict definitely increased as a result of that. So when we talk about conforming to group norms, I've already told you, norms is like the way in which a thing proceeds, the way in which a group proceeds and conducts themselves, right? So norms must exist for groups to be effective. If you consider an AA meeting, that's Alcoholics Anonymous, anonymous, if you've ever been to one. Um, there is you walk into any AA meeting in any place. Um, everybody's sitting in a circle. They're in chairs. There's no desks. There's no tables. There might be the group leader might have set up coffee. There's a break somewhere where people can go and socialize a little bit. And there's this kind of thing that happens, right? And everybody kind of knows what to expect. There are norms for how an AA meeting runs. There's a norm for the process of getting pizza. There's conformity because there are behavior changes that become a part of being a part of the group. So when you accept being part of this group, whether it's Alcoholics Anonymous or whether it's joining the police force, whether it's joining a specific group home, there is a certain behavior change that occurs because you accept that now I am part of this group and I conduct myself in this kind of a way. So there's compliance, which means a behavioral change without internal acceptance versus private acceptance, which is cooperation. Okay. So somebody might go along, like a lot of Nazi soldiers went along with Hitler's decision to um, um, exterminate all of the lesser races as far as he was concerned. And a lot of them did so out of fear for repercussions, but not because they truly believed that Jews were evil. But some of them did believe, that's private acceptance. Some of them did believe that the state of Germany was because of Jewish people. So the conformity task that Arthur Ashe did in 1956, um, what they found, what they did this experiment where they had two people, they had two lines line up to get some kind of service that they set up in a university, and they had people um, from the long line would jump to the short line even though they weren't supposed to. And what they found was that the more deviant from the norms a person was, the more ostracized they were from the group. So when they saw a person in the long line, because let's say, their name, the last names went from M to R, and that was a longer line than the names that went from A to D, right? Um, when they jumped to the shorter line, they found that when they interviewed the people in the longer line afterwards, they said that person acted improperly, that person's an idiot, that person's a cheater, all this other stuff. And there's a lot more um, negative language and a lot more rejection from the group. That's what ostracized means. Rejection from the group because they jumped the line. That's how powerful conformity is. So when we talk about the group mind posits three forces comes into play when you talk about a group of people acting with one mind. Number one is anonymity, number two is contagion, and number three is suggestibility. So the second theory, just so you understand, um, anonymity means that everybody has a group mind because they feel like they are anonymous within a group. Like when you have a group of people, no one person stands out, so they feel anonymous. There's also that theory that, the way one person thinks, if I accept being part of this group, then I'm going to think the same way. That's contagion, right? If I accept that I'm joining this church, then I will follow the beliefs of this church and I will accept their teachings as my own mind. That's contagion. And suggestibility is just the mere fact of being around a number of people who all think the same way inherently makes you more open to the way they think about stuff than if you were only like a sporadic member. You understand? If uh if you had prison guards with the Nazis who weren't living in Germany, but would just come in, I'm being hypothetical, right? If they just came in to Germany to help man the prison camps at times, they wouldn't necessarily have taken on all of the beliefs of the German soldiers that lived in Germany because there was that removability. So because they weren't around them, they weren't as suggestible as the German troops that lived in Germany. The second theory about this group mind is the convergence theory that posits that crowd behavior is represented by the convergence of compatible needs, desires, motives, emotions, and the latent tendencies to get acted out as part of the group. So you can have a situation where because everybody in a certain joins a group because they're looking for a certain outcome, then everybody is going to act a similar kind of way in order to get that outcome. Think of those riders, the G20 summit, right? They're all part of the group. They have a similar motive and desire. So they all act the same way. That's convergence theory. And the third theory is the emergent norm theory, that people adhere to the norms of the situation the group finds themselves in. As the crowd creates norms, the participants' inhibitions are lowered. So as the more you become part of the group, the longer you become part of the group, the more you accept how a group is going to act. The more you accept how a group is going to act, the more you by consequence um, become part of that group, and you lower your threshold for believability, or you lower your threshold for acceptance, right? You lower your guard for what you consider to be proper or improper behavior, right? All of that decreases. And finally, the fourth theory is de-individuation. And de-individuation is that state of anonymity that states that uh, anonymity increases the chances to act out socially, to jump on cars and to set fire garbage cans and break storefronts and assault people, right? Characterized by anonymity, decreased responsibility, large groups, the presence of being in large groups, a heightened sense of arousal, noise, and chaos, and movement, and all that sense, a loss of a sense of awareness in space and time, decreased concentration and judgment, a loss of a sense of time and of unreality, increases impulsivity and your more basic instincts. Right? So you less feel part of you as a person. You don't think of yourself as, I'm not a person who like attacks people. I'm not a person who um, fights with people, physically fights with people who disagree with me. I'm somebody who respects people's right to disagree with me. But the more you become part of a group, if you think about Trump supporters or something, or Democrats, right? The more you see them not not acting like themselves and acting more like the members of a group. It's hard to see the individual person anymore because now they just all act like the group. And that is all for today. And thank you very much for your time and for taking time to view this video. You can view this at any time that you want. You'll have a week to do it. And I might even leave it up longer, actually, in time for you to watch. Oh, no, I'll probably leave it up at least until your next test. Okay? So for now, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. I wish you all well.